I think from an early age, being part of the church or entering a church at 2, I think it really was my grandmother who was converted in 1959 at the Billy Graham Crusade, and I was age 8. And I would say she really was the first person to influence my faith in terms of not just going to church, but she taught me how to pray. She was prayerful herself, reading the Bible, telling stories about the Bible. So one night a week over 4 years definitely was, I'd have to say, she shaped my faith. I think church was such a big part of my life, being an Anglican, growing up, boarding school, church services for 4 years. But I think at 18, when I joined a youth fellowship in my local church, probably I could see, I didn't experience for myself a sense of God's grace in the lives of committed young Christians. But I would have always called my faith lukewarm until my mid-30s, when a similar experience, I think, to my grandmother, where I experienced grace over time through sermons, but I identified that as just that sense of truly being loved and forgiven, and yeah, as I said, quite different to what I'd experienced before in what I would have called a lukewarm faith, not quite preparing to put my toe in the water, but never ever doubting God. I think certainly my faith has been challenged through difficult times and certainly through circumstances I found myself in midlife as a single person and with children. But looking back at that, my faith was not so much challenged there, but strengthened by God's provisions of mature Christian people around me, and particularly godly women at that time. In that sense of family life, I think that was probably the only time where I really challenged my faith, because I thought, God's sense of family is fundamental, and so to have that sort of brokenness in a relationship, there were lots and lots of questions as why. But if anything, it just strengthened then my faith, and also around biblical truths. I was lukewarm, probably doing what I kind of wanted to do and never doubting God. But to hear sort of biblical truths and be challenged around them was really a time to, it was encouraging. But growing a dependence on God, definitely through personal anxiety, I think. Anxiety that hasn't come through circumstances, an anxiety, as a disposition. And I think through that anxiety, I've certainly had a greater awareness of a greater dependence on God. And that is really to look truthfully at who I was in relation to God, and just discerning, and how, because the anxiety just doesn't ever go, really. It just becomes part of who someone is, and not to be defined by it, but it has certainly in later years, 10, 15 years, given me a greater dependence to trust God through the anxieties or the unknown and fears. And so anxiety, in fact, has become a great blessing, although it's so easy to see it as a curse. There was also utter dependence on him through day-to-day of raising 3 boys, returning to the workforce, studying, definitely those things. I don't think I would never have had those lead without a full dependence upon him to undertake for those needs at that time. It's not to say they're all great times, but they were certainly times of blessing and thanksgiving. Yeah. Certainly the scriptures underpin that relationship, and by that I mean personal devotion. That would be daily Bible study groups. I think the scriptures, just in a word, would nourish that relationship, definitely. Not only through an intellectual approach to the scriptures, but also just that personal experience. And that's why, for me, being still and listen deeply is more important probably than it has been in previous years. Yeah. And the gifts from God in other ways, through worship, through songs, hymns, the psalms, devotions, writings. As I've just reflected on this myself, certainly in this season, perhaps through COVID, but also through caring for my mother, which I think for me, perhaps I saw COVID and caring for my mother as disruptions to my life. So there was a tension there, but I think just reflecting on God, how he uses disruptions, not as disruptions, but as seasons in a life, and just accepting that. Seeing it as a disruption, these things, I think, of other things I could be doing. I could be doing other Christian ministry or lots of other things, but it's just leaning into that sense that this is a season, and it has made now caring for my mother and the transition through COVID just as an acceptance and God's grace, and not seeing these things as disruptions to my life, but where I'm actually meant to be. That it's not a planned life that I'm leading, but a given life, and I'm been reminded of that really throughout my Christian journey in many ways. So easy to want to lead the planned life, but then what does the given life look like? And I think that's what it is for me at the moment. I think just that constant presence of Jesus with me, certainly, that sense of presence of walking with me and companioning with me. Particularly, I look back and think certainly there was a level in the circumstances throughout my life of being marginalised. And to me, marginalised is to be not alone, but lonely, and to just have had that ever constant presence of walking with Jesus as a companion. It's just that wonderful grace.